Point one, we've got basically different versions of short food chains, and I think we've got to bring it out more. So much research has been done as arguing about short food chains against some hinterland of opposition, when actually I don't see any coherence and consistency among short food chains. I think we've got to bring out much more those that are using choice and choice editing, those which have got political or non-political versions of it, whether they're going for a single indicator or multiple indicators, whether they're actually wrapping it around food security as feeding people as normal, or whether they want systems change including dietary change, whether they're trying to capture the consumer as exists, BMW aspiring consumer, or citizenship, sort of what does that mean in places like Britain where we don't have citizenship? Are we trying to go for cheap food or wider values? Is it agroecology or is it sustainable diets? Totally different things follow from all of those. Local food or industrial food, total diets or individual products. Do you see what I mean? Those are totally different, but you can have local foods in all of those. They have totally different meanings. I think one of the reasons we've been, no, I'm going to stick to my schedule. I'm already thinking about what I'm thinking. Point two, I'm looking at the clock, I'm getting a privileged dial roll. Point two, I want to ask, what is the point of food? I've spent my life working on food. I've been a farmer, I'm a grower, I'm president of Garden Organic, proudly so. But actually, what's the point of food? What is it for? I mean that genuinely. When I was a government commissioner responsible for advising government from the sustainable development, I said, what's land for? Because actually what you decide it's for determines. At the moment, look at Britain, what land is for is motorways and property. That's what land is for. And that's what food is for. Food is for fuel, not much more. And actually what the local food movement has been about, if we lump it together at the moment, my first point being how divided it is, actually it's about trying to position identity. Seems to me identity. I don't think anyone's used the word identity today, but for me that is actually the core thing around localism and short food chains. It's about identity. Whether it was the Hungarian example of the county, only 37,000 people. I live in Wandsworth in London. It's 250,000 people. There's not even an identity in Wandsworth. He was talking about 37,000 people, Moya. You know, this is piddling tiddling, this is village. How do you translate that to the first industrial society in Britain? What's it for? Land use, power, wealth, health, identity, culture, bonding, social life, pleasure, fuel, work? How do we deal with all of that with localism? Third point, what's the state of food thinking in Britain today? Well, I'll deal with Britain, Europe, and globally differently. But I think essentially, and I've written extensively about this academically, with Michael Heisman, my dear colleague and friend here in Food Wars, most starkly, which we're rewriting at the moment, it is essentially what we argued in that book and in other places, is essentially we're dealing with the crisis of productionism. And that is not productivism, by the way. Rural sociology and geography has got wrapped up in productivism, which is about agriculture. Productionism is the system. Big difference. Big difference. We're writing a section on that in addition too. Because people have said, why did you use this word? You've invented productionism. It's because it's systemic. Productivism has been taken to mean something very much about sort of the agriculture and the farm element in the literature. And the 20s and 30s science thinking that got turned into productionism, it had a social vision, a health vision. It was about producing more food to resolve the problems of society, to lower prices and raise health and deliver well-being from that. And that's what got into trouble. That model of just producing more food, even though it has got cheaper, all the box bits have been ticked by productionism since the 40s and 50s. It's actually hit brick walls of environment, health, trade, and the squeeze down the food supply chain. Agriculture only gets 9% of the money. in Britain. 25% goes to catering, 25% of value added goes to retail. Go and look at the agriculture statistics. DEFRA's own statistics show that. They give the figures. The chief economist of DEFRA wrote to me angrily saying, why do you keep using that stat? Because I say, because you gave me the stats. It's published. Why are we talking about agriculture when the money goes elsewhere? I was taught in economics, follow the money. And yet we're talking about the tiddling-piddly local bit, which gets almost no money. I don't understand it. Calm down. Fourth point, where are we at a global level? I think the policy, we have no alternative at the moment to the productionist paradigm. We've got drift, is the word I wrote here. I think this is deeply worrying. There's an argument emerging between whether or not we go sustainable intensification, the buzz phrase, have one more heave to intensify even more to keep this production system going. So Tesco can be full, Walmart can be full of cheap commodities of ultra-processed foods, as Carlos Montero brilliantly has called it. Fifth point, in Europe, I think the problem is that the CAP has been a magnificently successful policy. I defend the CAP. It is a rare example of an agricultural policy that is constantly modified, actually. But the problem is it now needs to be a food policy, and it's stuck as being an agricultural policy. It's bolted on some environment, but elsewhere in the Commission, we're seeing the most interesting rethinking going on around resource efficiency. And Europe took on the mantle from the 1992 Rio conference of sustainable production and consumption. And it's in that thinking that I think the short food chains work needs to go, which is why I was asking you about that interesting INRA has gone the case, by the way, much more than any other researchers around Europe, in my view. So I think we've got to be thinking much more about the total supply chain, and there's an interesting thinking emerging in Europe around resource efficiency. And then I think short supply chains both can be wrong. You can have a very resource expensive short supply chain, but resource efficiency is going to be the key thing. Sixth point, how am I doing, Liz? UK. I summarise and endlessly summarise the reflex of British food policy as leave it to Tesco. It is essentially leave it to Tesco, occasionally et al. And there was a moment after the commodity prices, 2007-8, when that began to change, when suddenly the leaders of the West said, oh, ye gods, you mean us? We might be affected by this too. The answer was yes. Many of us in this room had been saying for a long time, the food system is in a structural crisis. It's under structural tensions. The Chatham House report that I was involved in and a co-author of, we argued this was the new fundamentals. If you were Boyd Orr starting again now in 1930 or 40, what would you do? You certainly wouldn't start from where you were. You would put down onto the table the new fundamentals. Go and read the report if you haven't done it. It's still the best report for outlining those tensions. And the UK has had this messy attempt to try and deal with it. It suddenly engaged in 2007-8, the Cabinet Office report, the obesity, foresight and leading to healthy weight, healthy lives, the Whitehall reorganisation, the first civil service collaboration since 1955 came in 2008. The first cabinet subcommittee since 1955 on food came in, all closed down in 2010 by the coalition. Okay. And a rather weak Green Food Project came in which things like this don't even feature. And yet, meantime, the structural analysis, if you like, the Chatham House sort of analysis, has kicked in. You now go to OECD and FAO, and they're talking absolutely of that long drop, the long drop over 150 years of food prices with a blip in World War I, blip in World War II, blip oil crisis 1971-74. It's over. They all said, the economists in 2007, don't worry, it'll come back down, prices will come down. They did, but then they've risen and they're now as high as they were in 2007. And they're all now saying, all the long-term optimists are all saying the future is volatility and uncertainty and rising prices. Wow, is that interesting for us? That means, as opposed to us being oppositional, it means we're going with the grain. Food prices are internalizing some of the externalized costs. This is interesting for the reason I will just say now. My next point. Industry is now deeply worried. The people who've been making the money for the last 70 years off the land, squeezing the land, are now split. Some are looking long-term and deeply worried and saying, we've got to change how we do things, what we do. I'm always saying it, my least favorite companies on the planet that I spend my time watching, Coca-Cola and Pepsi, are now doing some of the most interesting things about water conservation, soil conservation, and energy reduction. Why? Because they see their vested interest in it. This is remarkable. At the very moment when the state has withdrawn, and at the European level, even though I've said nice things about the SEP and roadmaps and things like that, actually the European Commission, block your ears, don't report this back, but you know it's true, I'm looking at the Commission, is having to withdraw. It's wrapped up in the Eurozone crisis. Every civil servant, every commissioner I speak to says, well, we can't really deal with this now, we've got this other agenda. Actually, now is the time that pressure ought to be being put on. 2 minutes left. I'm on track. And now this is the crunch. Point 8, consumers. The problem is the public. Listen to those lovely stories from the Netherlands. They were all about dealing with the public. Forget the little farmer for a moment. It's about the consuming public. The Netherlands is this vibrant experimental country at the moment because A, it's got liquid capital, B, it's got small holdings, and C, it's tiny, it's integrated. And it doesn't have the legacy that, say, Britain has, which is one of the finance capital centres of the world, where the money sloshes around. My university is in the City of London, I look at a wall, a tsunami of cash is locked up there and is not coming down to the people. That's what the situation is. And we are arguing about little issues, about little local stuff. I mean, Susan George, who changed my life 40 years ago, not the actress, the really good one, she said, don't look down, look up. Absolutely right. That's why we should study Tesco, not local food systems, and local food systems through the lens of Tesco. And the tension between those is what we need to do. So my urging, where's Michel? He's gone. He's here. Michel has taken his jacket off, that's why I didn't see him. Get the centre, Moya and you, do get the centre to look up as well as down. Because the reformulation of agroecology that is being done in the name of big companies is both interesting and deeply threatening, I think, ahead. They have a different definition from what you, I, Moya, and I suspect most of us in the room want. 9th point. Consumers are locked in. They are locked into cheap food, plentiful food, but they've also got squeezed incomes. They're over-consuming, but at the same time, they know that food is a flexible item in the budget. We know that because Professor Dowler has taught us for 35 years about that. I'm not that old. Okay, she's a lot older than that, but for 35 years she's taught us that message. These local messages are tricky for consumers. Local food is more expensive. It means less money on housing. That requires a restructuring of society, not just buying the different local food product. There's a bigger picture here. 10th point. I teach my students, we teach our students on our masters, you've got 3 minutes with a minister, what will you say? Or 3 minutes with the head of the company, or 3 minutes with the community activist, what would you say? I'm going to do it in 1 minute. Even now, while we're meeting, the Labour Party is launching its new food policy, by the way. A consultation process. Who knows what they're going to say? I'd rather be here because we'll be rude about it later. 1, I think we need to identify what a sustainable diet is. What is a diet which is good for health, good for the environment in multiple indicators, biodiversity through to environmental externalities. I think that should be done by the European Commission. I think that should be a research project. I think we need to start translating it at national level and at local, because it will mean different things at different places. In northwest Wales, where it rains forever and Welsh blacks can keep the carbon in the field, maybe eat meat there. In Suffolk, maybe don't. It might mean different things in different places, instead of which public health nutrition has said, wherever you are in the world, eat the same diet. This is actually the opposite of short food chains. So we've got to think the public health, what Jeff Rayner and I called ecological public health. All of this is spelt out in our big book of that name. Second point is, I think the SDI, the Sustainable Diet Index, needs to be linked to pensions, linked to the living wage. We've got to think about the cost of food in existence. The means of existence is what we're about, not just alternative food niches. That's actually what got this whole area going. Third point, I think we've got to stop talking about agriculture and talk about horticulture. It's plants we want agroecology to produce, Michelle. It's plants, not dairy, not meat, plants, fruit, vegetables. That is what we need to be. We need to be more discriminating about what the land is used for, because we know the public health evidence. The public health evidence is categoric. The British overconsume, the Europeans overconsume, they overcalorize, overcarbonize, overwater everything in their diet, and it's heavily to do with meat and dairy. Fourth, we have to do more on employment, much more on employment. I see the argument for agroecology is about creating jobs, actually, but I totally agreed with Yuna from INRA. It's about the quality of jobs and the wages, which is why we've got to talk about where does the money go. Tesco's makes £4.5 billion profit a year. That's more than agriculture gets. And the fifth point is skills. I do think this has been a very tricky one for us, skills, but I come back to it all the time. We're all de-skilled, actually. It's not that skills are something the poor are feckless and useless and don't know how to manage their budgets, which is what my right-wing eugenicist conservative mother thought. It's actually, who is dead, so I can speak badly about her when she was dead, but I assure you I spoke badly about her when she was alive in front of her, and if she was with us now, she'd be shaking her fist at us and saying, where did I go wrong with that boy? We have to address this issue of skills, because everyone is de-skilled. Everyone. That's it, listen.
Thank you.